In a similar vein, President Luthuli of the ANC once declared the following. He said, "Without land, there is no dignity." Our own President, uMkhonto, said the following. He said the following, "Inkinga zethu zaqala ngesikhathi kufika abamhlophe kuleli. Bathatha umhlaba wethu, bathatha nomcebo wethu, bafika nomthetho wabo, bazenzela unothanda nje. Namhlanje asinamhlaba, namhlanje asinamfuyo, konke kwathathwa ngesihluku. Salwa silwela umhlaba wethu, asizange sivele siwanike abelungu." At this point, I want.
You know what I like about MK Party is that they want to solve problems to the core. They don't just want to solve problems, but they want to solve these problems to the core, because if you want to solve certain problems, you have to go to the root of the problem. In other words, they are doing so by acknowledging the kings, by acknowledging African leadership style. Because you have to be aware that these other political parties, or some of these political parties, don't want to acknowledge African leadership style. They don't want to acknowledge the kings. The reason they are not doing so is because they know very well that the politics of the West has given them access to power, access to control, access to money, access to manipulation, access to dictatorship, access to all these other things. So that is why their focus is not to acknowledge the African way of doing things or African leadership style. And this is what I like about MK. They're like, we have to acknowledge African leadership style. We have to acknowledge the kings. Why? Because the land was taken from the hands of the kings. The land was not taken from politicians or political parties. The land was not taken from African National Congress. So African National Congress was used as a vehicle to bring back the land. But in 1994, they didn't go back to the kings to say, you know what, here is the land or here is the power. Why? Because 9-4 was a scam. 9-4 was something else. If you want to deal with most of the problems that we are facing in Africa, not in other continents, in Africa, you have to acknowledge African leadership style. That's very important, because right now as we speak, we have a problem of crime. The crime rate in South Africa is up there. And most of the people right now are suggesting death sentence or capital punishment. But we have to understand that the African way of doing things has a system to solve some of the problems or most of the problems that we are currently facing. Because there's no way you can just deal with the problems such as gender-based violence, rape, and many other problems that we are facing without dealing with the root of the problem. Here is something that you have to understand. Some of you may agree with me, some of you may disagree. When you look at the politics of the West, the political system of the West, its focus is on individuals, it's on enriching certain people, it's on economy, controlling everything, manipulating people. So the political system of the West is not focusing on dealing with the problems that we are having. For an example, right now we have like a problem of gender-based violence, we have a problem of crime, we have all these problems. But if you use the African way of doing things, African leadership style has a system, as I've said, has a system of dealing with all these problems. Why? Because the African leadership style will always start at home, will always start by focusing on the family structure. This is what many people don't want. There's no way you can deal with gender-based violence. There's no way you can deal with crime without focusing on the family structure. So you have to acknowledge the family structure. You have to make sure that within the family structure, there are no cracks. That is why the African way of doing things prioritizes respect, because if you come from a certain society or a certain family, you are not only representing your family, but you are representing the entire nation. You are representing the whole society where you come from. That is why when you are doing something which is out of order, you are not only embarrassing your own family, but you are also embarrassing the whole society. Everything starts from a family structure. And that is why, in order for this family structure to be strong, in order for this family structure to be consistent, then we have to hold each other accountable. That is why there's a saying in Africa that says, in Africa, a child is raised by the community, or a child is raised by the society. In other words, in order to solve a lot of problems like crime, you have to begin from the family structure. You have to deal with the family structure. So, as a method to deal with the future problems, as a way to deal with the problems that might come, maybe that might arise in the future. So the political system of the West is only focusing on certain things. It's all about economy. It's all about enriching ourselves. It's all about having control. But now these political parties don't want to acknowledge the African leadership style or the African way of doing things. It doesn't mean it's perfect. But the reason they don't want to acknowledge it is because they know very well that it might disturb them. It might stop them from having certain benefits, or they might lose certain benefits as a result. That is why they don't want to acknowledge kings. That is why they don't want to acknowledge African way of doing things. So there's no way you can say you are for Africans as long as you want to live by the systems of the West.
And to recognize our traditional leaders who are here as part of uMkhonto WeSizwe, because in uMkhonto WeSizwe we believe that the land belongs to the nation and the land belongs to the people. His Majesty, the King of the Khoi and the San people, Glenn Taiposh. His Majesty, King Dalindyebo Matutu. His Majesty, King Zwelethu Mthethwa is here. And finally, our own President is a king, Ubabu Zuma. Yes, he is.
Order.
Our position is very clear.
Order.
Our position is very
Honorable
clear.
members. Honorable members.
Africa has the system of dealing with crime. Africa has a system of dealing with unemployment. Africa has a system of dealing with diseases. Africa has a system of dealing with any challenge that we are having right now. But the problem, we are being led by people who don't want to acknowledge African leadership style. Many African countries are administered through the political system of the West. Why? Because They know very well that if they can like adopt African way of doing things, like to bring back the elders, to consult the elders, to consult the kings, then they would no longer have that power, that control to do as they want. Because we believe that African way of doing things is outdated, it cannot work, it cannot function. But here is the thing. The political system of the West, it's all about themselves. So back then, we had no super rich kings. That if you are a king, you have to be super rich. Why? Because if you are a king, you have to sympathize or empathize with everybody, because a king is made by people. That is why a king would always prioritize his own people instead of being super rich. So instead of being super rich, it's like we have to share the wealth with other people so that everybody can have a means of surviving or can have a means of putting bread on the table. So Africa has a way of solving all of its problems. It's just that the African way of doing things has to be given a chance. But most politicians don't want that to happen because they know very well they might lose certain privileges. They might lose control. They might no longer be in charge. This is what I like about MK, that we have to, if we want to be free indeed, then it means we have to bring back African law. We have to bring back African way of doing things, so that before we can say we have to bring death sentence, then we know that at least we have adopted the African way of doing things in order to promote respect, in order to promote social cohesion, in order to promote many things that will bring society together.